Hey everyone, it's Brian. In this video, I wanted to talk about what it's like to actually be a math major. I was a math major at Penn State not too long ago. And towards the end of the video, I want to talk about some things that might make it easier if you are a math major. Now, I'm not talking about the first 2 years of university, at least in the USA, where many students just take calculus or general education courses. That's very like many majors, many engineering majors or science majors. So being a math major is not going to be all that different the first 2 years of school. What I am talking about is the last 2 years of college, your junior and your senior year, when you get into the actual, quote, real mathematic, rigorous, theoretic, abstract, proof-based math courses. And the first thing you're going to notice is that your class size has dropped dramatically, especially in the classes your senior year. If you're at a large university, maybe your class sizes were up to 100 or 200, maybe 300, depending on the size of your university. But when you actually get into those 400 level math courses, your class size is going to shrink to maybe 20, 10, less, depending. And so this brings me into my first real thing of what it's like to be a math major, in that there's not a lot of them out there. Probably in your circle of friends, at least it was true for me, I was the only math major. And if you're a math major in your immediate group of friends or the people you're with most of the time, you might be the only one, unless your group of friends or whoever you spend the most time with are also in that major. It's going to be hard to relate what you're studying with what they're studying. So oftentimes what'll happen is they'll ask, oh, what classes are you taking? Maybe you'll say algebraic topology, and they'll be like, what's that like? And it's extremely hard to describe to a non-math person. It's really just not something you can necessarily describe to a non-math person, at least not in a way that's going to give them a really good idea of what you're doing. And you'll often get comments like, oh, what's 22 times 48? Or all these like arithmetic problems, or they'll say, oh, you're really good at solving equations, when that's not even really what you're doing anymore. You know, the stuff that you're doing is dealing with abstract, logical, proof-based, it's not always formulaic unless you're doing an applied mathematics degree or a computational mathematics degree. But even then, even in those situations, it's not like you're a calculator just because you're a math major, but that's something people will sort of expect of you at times. And I don't blame people for thinking that. When they think of math, they really think of like the quadratic formula or arithmetic, and that's what most people think math is, and to a lot of people that is what math is. But when you're a math major, it's a whole different world. Another huge interesting thing when you're a math major is the type of homework you get. When you're in a calculus class or maybe a pre-calc class, your homework, maybe it's online like WebAssign, maybe it's from a textbook, but you maybe get like 10, 20, 30 questions, maybe more questions for that week or that assignment. But when you get homework for a rigorous math class, a proof math class, you maybe have 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 questions at the most for your homework assignment. And that should really speak to how not only more challenging, but also time-consuming problems are in these classes. Well, maybe you can do 20 calculus problems in 45 minutes, let's say. It might take you 45 minutes or more just to solve one problem in a proof-based mathematics class. And it's not that the solution is necessarily that much longer, it just takes that much more to think about. You have to use much more abstract reasoning than in a calculus class. When you're in a calculus class, you sort of either just have the formula, which will give you the answer, or just the one technique that if you follow the technique, you'll get there. Or maybe there's only a handful of techniques, like you have so many different tests for series convergent or divergent, or you have only so many techniques of integration. With a proof, well, there are different techniques. You have contradiction or contrapositive or direct proof, maybe a graphical proof, induction. There are different techniques, but it's not entirely clear which one you're going to use every time. And also, even if you have the correct technique, you might have to draw on a couple of theorems or facts or just kind of be creative to get a solution. And this can be just very time consuming. You know, I've spent hours on one problem just trying to figure it out, banging my head against the wall and just not getting anywhere because it just takes a different type of thinking. And so if you're a math major for long enough, you're going to try to find the answers to your homework somewhere. Now you already know you probably don't know a whole lot of other math majors unless you're good friends with the people in your class. And if you are, that's a great place to get homework help. It's probably the best place to get homework help is just by your peers. If you can't get help from the people in your class, probably the next best thing would go to the instructor. Obviously, the instructor knows the answer and will probably be able to push you in the right direction. But if it's the night before a homework assignment is due the next morning and you don't know anybody in the class you can call or text, the professor is who knows where, they're not going to be available, and you don't know how to solve a problem, you turn to the internet and then you find it's pretty difficult to find exactly what you're looking for much of the time. Granted, things have gotten probably a lot better in the last few years finding solutions online. If you're really stuck, maybe you can find some sort of solution or at least a partial solution. But even if you do find something, you have to make sure you can understand it. And so most of these online solutions, they could just be on an online forum where people are commenting on the solution or the proposed solution. And you're not always sure if they're correct. Oftentimes they are. But even if they are, you still have to interpret their solution. It might be a condensed solution, and then write your own solution kind of from your perspective. It's just totally different than if you have a calculus homework due tomorrow and you can just plug the integral into an integral calculator and get the answer. Or even you probably know somebody that's good at calculus and can help you with it if you really are stuck. And when you finally do get through all the homework, then there's the test or the exam, right? Now there's only so many ways that you can be tested as a math major. Typically, from what I've seen, most exams are comprised of definitions, true and false sort of questions, short problems, and proofs. I think this is fairly typical. And so a big portion of your study time is spent in just memorizing or understanding definitions, just exactly what things mean. It might not be what you expect from a math major. You might think of them doing more calculations or even more proofs, but really most proofs come from the definitions, and so they're sort of like the fundamental building blocks to build these proofs. And then the true and false questions, most of the time they're based on theorems, and maybe the professor will just tweak a word or two that'll make it false or state the theorem in a different way that just is still true. And so you sort of have to really know what you're talking about when it comes to these theorems so you can correctly guess these true and false questions. As for the short problems, you know, you can think of them as problems or maybe even short proofs depending on which class you're in, but they're usually just an application of a theorem or an application of an idea that you've seen in the class somewhere, or maybe the instructor sort of pointed you in that direction before, or maybe you really just have to come up with something kind of new and creative on the spot that once you get it, it shouldn't take you too long to figure out the problem. And then probably the bulk of the difficulty, the bulk of the exam is writing full proofs. So a lot of the time the teacher will ask you to just prove this theorem. You know, this is the theorem we learned in class, state it and prove it, or simply just prove it. And they might just give you a big blank page where you can just prove the entire theorem. A lot of the times professors are nice in that they will tell you close, more or less, what to expect on the exam as far as the definitions and the theorems and the proofs. Most of my experience with this is that if a professor is expecting you to prove a theorem or something that's difficult to do, they'll tell you ahead of time, so you've plenty of time to prepare, or maybe they'll give you a list of many theorems that could be on the exam, and they'll say like 1 or 2 of these is going to be on the exam, and you're going to have to prove it, so you better know all of them. Now, while that may sound really intimidating, while it may sound really bad, if you enjoy the subject, it's pretty okay. Sometimes it is a lot of work. It's a lot of memorization. It's a lot of deep understanding, because a lot of times it's almost too much to memorize for one exam. You really sort of have to get your head around the material so you can almost just have the idea of the proof in your head, And then when it comes test time, you kind of can fill in the gaps with your understanding. So if you are a math major, I do have a few little tips that you may want to try. The biggest one is to make friends with the people in your classes. See if you can get a study group going, see if you can just start hanging around them. They're probably your best resource for getting the homework done, studying for tests. I can't tell you how many times I've been working with the people in my class, and just being around them, just working with them, listening to them, bouncing ideas off each other has helped me tremendously in my courses. I really don't think I would have gotten through or succeeded at the level that I did without that resource. The next tip is to really get a good relationship with your professor. Aside from the people in your class, your professor is probably the next best resource. They do have all the answers, and if they know that you're trying, they will probably push you in the right direction. They will probably be willing to help you out a great deal. My third tip is to get familiar with the online resources and forums that will be able to point you in the right direction with a lot of problems you're working on. So things like Math Stack Exchange or Math Overflow, those are great resources. Many things have been worked out on these websites that will be able to point you in the right direction for a lot of the problems you're going to be dealing with as an undergraduate. My last little tip is that if you are the only one in your group of friends that's a math major, don't let anyone make you feel bad for that. Don't let anyone make you feel like the black sheep. Proudly own your math major and enjoy the journey. If you'd like to see more of my math talks, talking about my experience as a math major and a math person, you can click in the comments below. I've got a pinned comment. You can go take a look at all of my math talks. Thank you very much for watching. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. Have a great day.